I just had this flash of insight that we're looking at the wrong problem and that this wasn't an obesity problem, but this was a muscle problem. 74% of Americans are either overweight or obese.
It's a big number.
Our children growing up with unhealthy muscle, their probability of having some kind of comorbidity, it's easily over 50%.
What's your take on GLP-1s?
My concern is that we are going to swap the obesity epidemic for sarcopenia, which is low muscle mass and function. People are not prioritizing muscle health. It almost accelerates aging.
Average patient comes to you, you got 30 seconds with them. They say, what do I do?
Lift hard, prioritize your protein, and get your mind right.
Welcome to 2%. I'm your host, Michael Easter. Now, when most of us think about the biggest health problems that Americans face, we immediately think about obesity. About 70% of the country is either overweight or obese. But today's guest, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who's the founder of Muscle-Centric Medicine, she actually argues the problem is that we don't have enough muscle. So I wanted to bring her on to get into the details of that because it's a somewhat controversial take, but I think she's got a lot of good evidence that points to maybe she's onto something. So we got into the nuance. We talked about where the argument is strongest, where it might miss the mark, if focusing on muscle can actually have some downsides, and how we can use her information to live in a way that helps us while not making us slaves to the gym and eating like meatheads. So we'll see what she has to say. Bringing her on now. All right, well, Gabrielle, thanks for coming on the show.
This is a long time coming. Again, we were just chatting, tons of mutual friends, and I've been following your work for easily a decade now.
Well, likewise. This will be a lot of fun. So I want to get into one of your big arguments. It's kind of this flip where most people aren't overly fat. They're almost under-muscled. So unpack that for us. And why is that a good way to put a lens on health?
Well, especially for your audience who I would say craves the harder thing. One area where I feel like we don't ask a ton of questions is in the medical sphere. And what do I mean by that? We've all heard common fables, like you should wait an hour after you eat before you go swimming. I'm sure that you've heard that. Or that you should drink 8 glasses of water, or perhaps that you should walk 10,000 steps. Or even don't eat eggs because eggs are bad for cholesterol. All of these things are inherited scientific beliefs. Why is that relevant for this idea that we're not over fat, but we're under muscled? For the last 50 years, we've been chasing an obesity epidemic. But what if obesity at its root wasn't the problem, but it was a symptom of a different problem, which is unhealthy skeletal muscle? 50 years, we're attacking the wrong thing, and the quality of our answers are based on the quality of the questions that we ask. And I would argue that, again, this might sound, you opened by saying my argument that this might sound controversial, but we don't have an obesity epidemic. And I say that gently. Clearly, we do. But what we really have underneath it all is a muscle epidemic, is a low dysfunctional muscle mass epidemic, which is at the root. Obesity is just a symptom. One.
Is that then a function of the fact that people are a lot less active, and specifically they're not doing strength training, whether that be in the gym or just living in a way that is challenging their muscles? Is that kind of one of the core fundamentals behind it, or what's your thoughts there?
All the above.
Okay.
All the above. So when we think about skeletal muscle health, first of all, what is muscle? The way that people think about muscle, we all know that Monday is Universal Chest Day and maybe Friday is Universal Leg Day.
Oh, yeah.
But that's, you were at Men's Health for a long time at, one sector, and the major overarching thought about skeletal muscle is that it's good for performance. That's great, but that's only one small attribute of skeletal muscle, which is surprising for some people. Performance is in one bucket, but when we think about obesity, Alzheimer's, which is type 3 diabetes of the brain, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. These are diseases, metabolic diseases over time. They get their roots in skeletal muscle first, purely because our diet is mismatched to our muscle health. And if you are eating and not training for muscle health and you're consuming a standard American diet, then the downstream effect is all these other metabolic components like elevated triglycerides, like elevated blood sugar, like hypertension, all of the things that we think about when we think about metabolic syndrome as being relating to obesity is actually a muscle problem. And, where did this start? Why did it happen? Well, there's two overarching ways in which we stimulate muscle. One is through activity. And we know that 74% of Americans are either overweight or obese. I want to pause there. 74% of our population, 3 out of 4 people is either overweight or obese.
It's a big number.
And our children, what about our children? For the dads out there, for the moms out there, our children growing up with unhealthy muscle, their probability of having some kind of comorbidity is exponential. It's easily over 50%.
It's crazy. Is there an ideal amount of muscle that you want to see in people? Like how does, because you did say, yes, there is an obesity epidemic. We probably have too much fat, but then this underlying thing is, yeah, but we don't have enough muscle. So what's the balance there, and what do you want to see out of people?
This is a great question, and I really appreciate you asking it. You've probably heard that we are roughly 40% of our body weight is skeletal muscle. Is that a good number? I think that it's currently the average for women is about 30%.
Okay.
There's two things here. I would say the more muscle mass you have, the better. And it's crazy that we don't have an optimal number for what that should be. But we do know when there is a problem, because a problem is called either sarcopenia or wasting or cachexia, which is too little muscle mass. In fact, that's one reason why people die.
Yeah.
Cancer cachexia is a overall loss of muscle and body. So the number, I would say number one, to give you a straight answer, the higher the better. Minimum of 40% of your body weight. But the next reality is that it should be healthy skeletal muscle. And people say, well, what's the difference? Why do you keep saying skeletal muscle? Well, there's smooth muscle, like say in the uterus, and then there is cardiac muscle, and then skeletal muscle. Have you ever had a Wagyu steak?
Yes, I have. Not too often, but every now and then.
So you've had a Wagyu steak. A Wagyu steak, that's fat that infiltrates into muscle.
Yeah.
That is essentially unhealthy, weaker muscle. And when we are inactive and not training, it's not just about the Wagyu steak. It's what happens within the human.
Yeah. So is this why? So someone could listen to this and argue, and say, well, don't people who are overweight have more muscle because they're carrying around more of themselves? And then the counterpoint is, yes, but what is the quality of that muscle? Is that kind of how you would argue that?
That's exactly right. And that's why our trainers out there and our people that are attacking muscle health, that's where the real transformation in our healthcare is going to be, is recognizing muscle as an organ system, not just for performance. Because, Michael, you and I are in the world of get after it. This is about performance. And so muscle health really isn't a problem.
Yeah.
But as we think about, you wrote The Comfort Crisis, and as you think about doing harder things, the focal point of that is skeletal muscle, and the lever that you pull to become mentally stronger, the lever that you pull to manage your environment comes from the voluntary control and asking the contraction of that muscle.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I have a question. You said you can't have too much muscle.
I'm still trying.
Yeah. But I'll say from my own experience, I've always been generally lean. When I get past, say, 190 pounds, I'm 6'1", I don't move as well. I start to get like a little bit more joint pain because I do a lot of trail running, all these things. So is that more just a problem once you get into these sort of high performance people, or like how do you square that question?
Well, I would say that I have very rarely ever had someone say I have too much muscle. If someone is attacking their endeavors naturally, right, there is this threshold for how much muscle mass someone could put on, that I haven't actually seen them get too much muscle. Now, I want to say from a metabolic perspective, meaning so I'm still a practicing physician. Mm-hmm. So in my medical clinic, Strong Medical, we always measure muscle mass. Here is where your statement becomes relevant, is for, I think that you recently did, it was some 800 miles, something crazy. You did some,
it was a long,
what did you train for?
It was a very long hike. We'll keep it short. It was a very long hike.
Okay. So you trained for a very long hike. For that particular endeavor, mm-hmm. muscle and weight might be a challenge. Yeah. I think about my husband. My husband did the Boston Marathon. He's 220 pounds, maybe 230 pounds. He did the Boston Marathon. and then he did back-to-back Big Sur.
Okay.
He would probably run faster if he wasn't so heavy.
Yeah.
So for that particular sport, that might be a negative. But from a outcome perspective of health, we don't see that.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, yes, but the average person, if you're just focused on the lever of health, you don't have to worry about this. And you did say that, like, you kind of hinted at, maybe a person could have too much, but that would probably come from using performance enhancing drugs. And then we're in a completely other universe where, we're not really chasing health anymore.
Yeah. It's I would say it's the equivalent of, could someone be too smart?
Yeah.
You would say, well, no, but they could be too smart for their own good.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So you came up through geriatrics, is that right? Like studying older population?
I have somewhat of a unique training, and I trained in nutritional sciences for professionally 6 years.
Okay.
So I did my undergraduate in nutritional sciences, and then I went to medical school, and then I did 2 years of psychiatry, 3 years of family medicine, and then I went back to do a fellowship at WashU in geriatrics and nutritional sciences.
Okay. Did you see this play out a lot among older people, especially as they aged and sort of lost some of that muscle?
I actually saw it throughout my entire career. I saw it when I was in medical school. I saw it when I was in my 2 years at the University of Louisville in psychiatry. And there isn't a time where I didn't see it. And what is it that I didn't see? I saw the majority of people inactive setting an example for their families and their communities that was really less than ideal, and constantly going through this gain and loss of the same 20 pounds. So that's something that I did see. And then in geriatrics, I would say that it really scarred me. And what do I mean by that?
Yeah, tell me about that.
You're probably thinking, is this girl kidding? She went into medicine. She knows what she signed up for. I didn't willingly study geriatrics. And for those who are listening, geriatrics is the study of 65 years and older. It is also end of life. So 65 and up, and part of that training is end of life care. I wasn't prepared for that. I did it because I wanted to continue studying nutritional sciences and vitamin mineral metabolism and body composition. But the deal was, in order for me to do research as a physician, I had to continue training, doing a fellowship in medical education.
Yeah.
I spent 2 years at the bedside of people that knew that they were at the end. And that's very powerful. I don't know if you've ever been at the bedside of a non-family member who is ready to take their last breath.
I have, unfortunately. It's definitely very heavy, also very powerful.
And there's a moment where there's nothing for you to do. There's no right words. There's no way to fix it. We're not solving this problem. This is essentially the end. And I pause because it's emotional. I was also doing research on body composition and brain function. And part of that was a study. And this study is looking at middle-aged women and their body composition and what their brain function looked like. And as part of geriatrics, we run a memory and aging clinic. You look at imaging of the brain, and we were looking at fMRIs of these participants. And this woman who is just incredibly boisterous and a mother of 3, I imaged her brain, and her brain looked like the beginning of an Alzheimer's brain. And after rounding on the weekends, nursing homes, assisted living, inpatient care, I knew what was in store for her. And I couldn't sit by and do nothing, but essentially I was forced to. And she had always followed the advice that you and I often hear, which is eat less and move more. And she was so focused on this obesity challenge that she never spent time prioritizing muscle, which was the one thing that it was going to save her. And I'm not just talking about from a mobility standpoint, but really from a metabolic, functioning brain health standpoint. And many of the people that I saw at the end of their life, they had either fallen, they had broken a hip. And I had this flash of insight. And part of medical insight comes when you least expect it, when you've spent years thinking about these problems, getting a base level of of training. And I just had this flash of insight that we were looking at the wrong problem and that this wasn't an obesity problem, but this was a muscle problem. And that's really where this concept of muscle-centric medicine came from.
So with a patient like that, are you able to start an intervention? You're like, all right, we got to focus on your muscle. And did that help? And then sort of the overarching question for listeners is, if you're over 60, 65, is it too late to start? Or can people in that age group actually build and improve their muscle? Because I think a lot of times you hear, you're kind of too far gone. You don't actually build that much muscle after you're age 60, 65, whatever.
The best time to start is now, or before, but the second best time to start is now. It's never too late. People are never too old, but the one thing that gets in their way is they're not able to collapse timeframes. People will say, I'll start on Monday, I'll start next week, or I just can't get myself to do it. And it seems innocent, especially in midlife when you are capable. But what I will tell you is, at the end of people's lives, they don't talk about the illness. They talk about the regrets in the way that they wish they had lived. And it's very powerful. It's kind of like, and this is a much more toned down version. In high school, we all fall in love for the first time. It's the worst thing ever if it doesn't go well, which, I mean, the reality is probably not going to go well. You spend all this time consumed. It's just a total mess. And then you fall in love again, maybe in college, and that's also terrible. But then as you fall in love subsequently, listen, I'm not talking about the people that have been married 40 years, but as we mature as adults, by the fifth time you're dating someone new, you're probably a little more like, okay, this is what I can expect. And when you look back on that high school romance, you go, gosh, that was so major, and it probably didn't have to be so intense. And the same thing from a physical perspective. One day you wake up at 40 and your joints kind of hurt, and it's a new thing, and it never happened before. And so you really didn't think so much about it. And the reality is people can always do something about it, but the one thing that gets in their way is their inability to connect their future self to their current self. And I will just say this, as a practicing physician, when women come to the practice at Strong Medical, they say, well, I've never lifted weights, or I can't do that. But the reality is that backpack that you're carrying, that toddler that you're picking up, that dog, those groceries, you've been lifting weights your whole life. You just might not have put the verbiage to it and structure.
That's such a great point. When people come to you and they're new to all this, where do you have them start? And then where do you want them to end? Are you putting them on like the ideal program at first? Or are we going to like walk people into this?
Well, for my patients personally, they're really self-selected. So there's two types of patients that come to me. They are the kind of patient that has tried everything and nothing has worked. I don't think that you know this about me, but I started my career very early on serving military operators and doing a lot of performance-based stuff. But I'm not talking about the stuff of, okay, I just want to carry more weight. It's, I've been deployed to multiple different locations. I'm still having GI issues. I can't sleep. I'm getting weird rashes. So we solve a ton of different challenges that, I mean, the average number of providers our patients have been to before they get to us is around 12.
Wow.
So we solve complex problems and treat people. The other group of individuals that come to me are people that have really tried everything and they are just wanting to get better. They feel good, but they want to be the best version of themselves. And so if it's a complex patient, we deal with whatever the challenge is. Is it environmental exposures? Is it Lyme disease? Is it even alpha-gal syndrome is having a comeback? I remember my first case of that, which is this Lone Star tick bite 10 years ago I saw it. You kind of have to unravel all of those things, but you do it quickly because you ask the right questions. And then the other group is, we go all in. If you are looking to become the better version of yourself, then it really is getting very closely connected to that why and being very truthful with yourself. What are the things that you are doing? What are the things that you are not doing? Because there is a group of people that it's not that they need to do more. It's that they need to really connect by doing the right thing.
If someone's just thinking about this from a health perspective, average person, how often do you want them strength training?
3 days a week.
3 days a week
minimum? 3 to 4 days a week.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Since we were talking about this guy's kind of psychology as well, your new book, it opens with how to think before it ever gets into the eating and the training. Why'd you start there? And I'm gonna make a guess and say that the psychiatry background might have played a role there.
Well, muscle is the only lever that you really have conscious control over, but you have to make the decision to execute on it. And how to think, if you don't get really clear on your why, and people say that all the time, but Michael, you know, when things are really tough, the more superficial your why is, the less connected to it, the more likely you are to fall off track. And people, they need to understand that, and they need to stop being surprised by their own human nature. For example, in the book, we talk about creating friction, which I would say nobody does this better than you. I've read your book.
Thank you.
And the one thing I noticed, I will say this, is that there's not a lot of women. I don't know if I recall any women in your book.
There's a handful. There was a few chapters held down by, like the nature chapter is held down by a woman. The chapter on gut health was held down by a woman. So there's a few, but it's probably male heavy.
For the comfort crisis, and the reason I say this is because how can we shift that?
Yeah.
How can we help people remember that their inherent human nature is one of strength?
Yeah.
And for me personally, as I wrote the Forever Strong playbook, which I'm actually working on my third book, it's not going to be out for another year and a half. It's the Forever Strong Woman.
Awesome. I love it.
Because we have to be able to lean into the fact that if we create friction, and this is actually one of the tools that I give to a lot of the high performers, is that if you add in low levels of friction, and there's a million different ways to do it, whether it's environmental friction, whether it's social friction, whether it's emotional friction, that you become better at dealing with those challenges.
Yeah.
And so something really simple that any listener could do, which I would love to see them do, listener or viewer to do, is flip a coin. Heads, you get the Starbucks, tails, you don't. If you are someone who loves loud, so I train with loud music, loud music, lots of caffeine, I'm all in all the time. Heads, I get it. Tails, I don't. It is so desperately annoying. And it's it just deflates you a little bit can you imagine? I don't know if you train with loud music, but for those that do, it's a total buzzkill. And what happens is the fifth time that coin flip sucked for you, you're like, okay.
I've done it before.
Next?
Yeah, I think there's a good argument to make that if you need some ancillary thing to do another thing, that almost makes you more fragile, because if you're so like, I can't train without my music, but then the phone dies, are you just not going to exercise? And then that kind of gives you this door out. Whereas if you can learn to do that, well, now you've stripped away all these prerequisites I need in order to do this thing that's fundamentally going to be good for me.
And I think that's right. And it's one of the things that I really appreciate about your work is always striving and putting people in a position to reframe that experience. And I think, one of the biggest health crises that we have is this crisis of distraction. People are very distracted. And so they're not able to do the next right thing. And so the Forever Strong playbook is we eliminate that. You don't have time. And I think back to these elderly patients, we think we have time to be distracted.
Yeah.
But we don't. And that compounds those small decisions. Not only do they erode our self-confidence, because we all, quote, know what the right thing to do is, but it undermines our ability to show up and be present and be able to bring our best work forward, which I think is really critical. So people need to train 3 to 4 days a week, and they need to understand that after a big event, they're not going to feel like training. And every time they make that decision that it is optional, they make a decision that's not in favor of their health. For me, I've been training my entire life. When I say my entire life, I don't know, for the last 30 years. Every Sunday night, I start bitching about Monday's workout.
Awesome.
Listen, so it's Wednesday. I'm already bitching about Friday morning's workout. And I really go through this litany of, okay, am I going to show up? I'm probably not going to show up. And I probably spend 15 minutes negotiating with myself, and I always show up.
Awesome.
It can do whatever it wants, but you still have to execute on the thing.
So I feel like that kind of brings us back to the whole question of why. And you mentioned that a lot of times people have superficial whys. So to me, a good example might be, hey, I'm going on a cruise in a month, so I need to get my life together. And you do, but only for the cruise. And then when the cruise is over, where do you go from there? So like, what's a good example of whys that you've seen in the people that you work with that you're like, that's a solid one. That's going to help you in the long run.
Why don't I share my husband's why?
Love it.
So my husband was in the SEAL teams for 10 years as a medic. And he was deployed. He went to war a handful of times. And as the medic, if a guy gets blown up, he was one of the guys that they would send in. And he has taken care of a handful of guys that stepped on an IED and were essentially castrated.
Jeez.
They send him in, he stabilizes, they help get him out, and he couldn't do anything. There was no recovering this.
Yeah.
This experience, this limb for the guy, the fertility so that he could never have a family. There was nothing that he could do. Right now, he works 100 hours a week, which is insane depending on the week. It sucks. I've never heard him complain. And he's training in urology so that when the next guy comes around, he can help them.
That's awesome.
Have a family, have optimal hormonal health. And so when you think about a why, an example, do you think that if he had a horrible week or the nurses did X, Y, and Z, do you think even for 1 second he would be like, screw it, I'm going to quit?
Yeah, because the why isn't necessarily about him. It's about helping other people. And I feel like even at a practical level for people, it might be my why is that I want to be able to do X, Y, Z with my kids when I'm 60. And so it's like, I need to show up for them,
But is that to me, in my experience, it's not enough for people.
Oh, really?
Because it's not enough for people. Because how many people do we know personally that everybody wants to be around for their kids? Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to not be a burden to their family. It has to take something real visceral to be able to move the needle. I am talking about so visceral, like remembering when your grandmother died of Alzheimer's at her bedside, knowing that you also carry the ApoE4 gene.
Yeah.
Again, how do we help people? How do we have them listen to this conversation and go, you know what? Whatever I thought I was thinking is my why, the faster it is to come up with your why, the more I would say you have to go back.
You got to think about this for a while.
Go back and go deeper, because ultimately, I think that we are at a precipice where we can build stronger, more resilient humans. But the only way that we're ever going to do it is if we do it at a very visceral, foundational level, one that is so deep that it becomes an absolute necessity.
All right, nutrition. Cover this in the book. If someone were to change one thing about how they eat, where would you push them?
That's a good question. Typically, I would have them increase their protein.
Okay. I
say this cautiously because there's a protein-ification of the world where now you can have your Starbucks and then there's added protein.
Yeah.
And so I would say, whole foods are best, but everyone already knows that. But the reality is if we talk numbers, the dietary guidelines came out and they've now, for the first time ever, increased their protein recommendation to 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kg.
What was it before, just for context for people?
0.8 grams was the RDA and is still the RDA.
Yeah.
0.8 grams per kg is still the RDA. But the recommendation, now there is a very specific recommendation to increase dietary protein to 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kg. And surprisingly, this is a very controversial topic, but the reality is the way our nutrition is set up, it's to prevent deficiencies.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to prevent deficiencies if you're looking to be the best version of yourself. It's great if you're the best version of yourself mentally, but the mind and body are intrinsically connected.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, which is if you're eating close to a gram per pound of your target body weight, which for many people, they think that that's a lot. There's ways to do it, by the way, as I'm thinking about it, which would be really easy for your listeners.
Yeah, tell us.
There's ways to improve this, because I'm thinking about you as I'm talking about this. You're 6, did you say 6'2"?
6'1". I won't lie in this situation. I will shave off that inch.
So I appreciate that. So for someone who's 6'1" and you're doing all this work, the idea that, let's say if you're 200 pounds or whatever you are, you're moving around a lot, you're doing a lot of things, you're not thinking about eating 200 grams of protein.
Yeah.
And especially with the use of GLP-1 for both men and women, the idea of hitting close to 1 gram per pound of target body weight is a lot. So if you have a female listener and she's like, well, I'm 130 pounds, I like that weight, I want to age well and optimize my aging, I'm going to shoot for 130 grams of protein a day. She's probably thinking there's no friggin' way, right? The average female consumes maybe 75 grams of protein a day.
Okay.
So there is a huge delta.
Yeah.
And so if I were to lay it out, here's how I would do it. The first meal and the last meal of high quality protein is critical. Nearly all studies are done on that first meal. It is so important for stimulating muscle, and it can't be below a particular threshold. So to simplify, you need between 30 and 50 grams of protein at one time, especially through aging. So if you're under 25, if you're under 35, disregard this. Okay, disregard this. But if you are 35 plus, try this one thing and let's see what happens. 30 to 50 grams of protein at that first meal. Muscle is in a catabolic resting state. You stimulate it, you put the fuel on it, 2 ways, resistance training and dietary protein. That first meal could be a protein shake, which again, a protein shake might have, depending on how you do it, 18, 20 grams of protein. Maybe you have eggs, but you would need 6 eggs if you want to hit that threshold, which is a lot. I don't have a huge appetite in the morning. Or what you could do is you could have a smaller amount of protein that you ingest. So for me, I have Greek yogurt. And then you use essential amino acids to bump up that nutrient density. And I personally think that this is the way of the future, especially with decreasing appetite.
Yeah, like in the GLP-1 context, decreasing appetite.
Also, the evidence suggests, and I've seen this in my own clinic and I've seen this in aging, is that people's appetite goes down.
Yeah, over time.
And so I'd love to share, if I can, I'd love to share the company I use and how I do it specifically.
Yeah, tell us.
For the listener. So for me, I have 2 little kids. I have a 5 and a 6-year-old. Mornings are bananas. I train in the morning and then I take them to school or I take them to camp. What I do is I will have a Greek yogurt. Actually, and I use low fat because I just like it. A low fat Greek yogurt. And then I use 2 scoops of something called Perfect Amino, which is by Body Health. It's a essential amino acid. I use 2 packs. I put it in a separate drink. I have my yogurt. So I'm only having to eat half a cup of yogurt and I hit that threshold. My body composition has never been better because I'm able to hit that target. So what I used to do is I used to be like, I'm not hungry. I'll force myself to have 1 egg, even though I trained really hard, and then I'll wait and I'll continue my day. And I missed that first window. But if people can get that first meal right, and it can be whole foods, it could be a protein shake, or it could be a combination of essential amino acids, because that's what's critical for muscle health. You can't just have the branched chain amino acids. You can't just have the bodybuilding style. You're not going to have all the nutrients that you need. If people could make that one change, and we have seen this in the literature, by improving nutrient density with protein at that first meal, body composition improves.
That's great. And I feel like it's sort of the overarching message to me is you're getting the numbers you want that help you, but you found a way that fits into your life well, right? It's like there's not any specific magic food. The only thing that makes a food magic is, does it hit these numbers? And will I actually eat this thing? That's very big for people. Like my mom is in her 70s and she's trying to get more protein. And she found that it's kind of like ready to drink things from Costco. She's tried those. That just kind of gets her enough, and it's not going to be super filling because her appetite isn't that big.
Exactly. I would love for you to send me that, because let's take a look at what she's having, because right now she has to get that right. So if you're at 35, do you have some wiggle room? You do. But I know for me, I also had to find solutions. And everybody listening to this, most of the time, people are busy in the morning and they're thinking about their macros overall. And while that's really helpful, if you set up that first meal, and so Heather Leidy, I have a podcast, I just interviewed the 2 people that wrote the protein portion of the dietary guidelines. So my book actually reflects the new dietary guidelines. My mentor helped write them. And it's just very exciting. And he's a career scientist. And so when they were on our show, we were talking about, okay, so this is great. In an ideal world, you're preparing your food and you're having your perfect meal that's regenerative in nature. But the reality is we are busy. People don't have huge appetites. And it's how do we go through aging well, and how do we optimize our muscle for that time? And really, your mom is a great example. And also for me, and just for so many people, they don't get that first real meal right. They have a big steak dinner and maybe they have some potatoes, and maybe on paper they hit their total protein goal. But the data shows, and this is again out of Heather Leidy's lab, is that when you get that 30 to 50 grams in the morning at that first meal with the right amino acids, you're less likely to crave food 90 minutes later. Your brain doesn't even light up the same way when you look at a cupcake. So you augment your willpower by getting that first meal right. And that's just a very practical tip for people because there is so much noise out there. Nail the first meal. You can regulate your blood sugar. You regulate your appetite. And also, just from a numbers perspective, when your blood sugar goes up and goes down, you release stress hormones because you have to compensate for the decrease in blood sugar.
I really like that you use the word protein-ification. I'm going to tell you a quick story here. So I was in Nashville area recently, and I went to a Waffle House because when you're in the South, you might as well try and give yourself diabetes. So I sit down, I order waffles, of course, eggs. But as I'm looking at the menu, I noticed that there is a protein bowl. It's got 53 grams of protein, big advertisement. But when I looked at what actually went into making this thing, it's a ton of eggs, it is a ton of cheese, it's a ton of sausage, and this whole thing had like 1,000 calories. So with this protein craze, I have two worries, and I want to hear your feedback on them. One is that when people try to bump up their protein, they often end up eating way too many calories, which could drive up their weight and could lead to some bad health outcomes. The second is that if you're eating more protein, what are you not eating? And when you look at what the actual everyday person doesn't eat, it tends to be fruits and vegetables. So I think only 1 in 10 Americans meet the fruit and vegetable recommendations. So long way of asking you, are you worried at all about that? Does that sort of thought in my head have any merit? And how do you answer that?
It's a great question because actually what you're doing is this is the majority of people and we're exposed to so much. Calories, excess calories, that's a problem. The idea of proteinification of food is now adding excess calories to an already calorically dense eating program is not a good idea. It's not a good idea. And it's interesting because while protein is not easily stored as fat because it's all oxidized, it's difficult to store as fat, no one's eating just pure protein. Right? You're not having that sausage bowl doesn't just have the macronutrients are not the following: 50 grams of dietary protein, 0 grams of fat, and 25 grams of carbohydrates. You're talking probably about 50 plus grams of fat, 50 plus grams of protein, and probably 75 grams of carbohydrates. This is a problem. It's a problem. How do we approach that? I think people have to become very aware and understand that there's a protein target, which is different for everybody. It's based on age, activity level, preference. There's also a carbohydrate target, which we're actually going to be publishing a white paper on that. It's on carbohydrate tolerance. The body can only dispose at rest roughly 50 grams of carbohydrate at any one time. So if you are not moving around and your muscle glycogen is full and you have 50 grams of carbohydrates at breakfast because you're having a proteinification bowl, and then you have another 50 grams at lunch, or the average, according to Haynes data, the average American is having 100 grams of carbohydrates 3 times a day. So 300 grams of carbohydrates and not exercising, they're essentially doing 3 oral glucose tolerance tests a day.
Wow.
And this is, again, setting us up for just complete metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah.
I would say choose leaner cuts of protein, but definitely you've got to target protein first.
What's your take on GLP-1s? If someone is on them, what should they be thinking about? Does it all come back to what we've been talking about?
I'm going to give you my professional opinion on GLP-1s.
Yeah, please do.
I've been a physician for roughly 20 years, and we've never seen anything more effective in this space. There is benefit, there is utility, there's a lot of controversy around them. For example, I'll say one thing that your listeners might be thinking in their head, that they hear it affects muscle mass and decreases muscle mass, and that's somehow something special about the GLP-1s and decreasing muscle mass. That's not true.
Okay.
It's not true. Before, and I worked in a weight management clinic, this was part of my training, and we didn't have access to GLP-1s. But GLP-1s are not a new drug. They've been around for 20 years, easily 20 years, but they were used in endocrinology and used for diabetes, used for other things. Now they're available for weight management and can be used off-label for a number of things. They're here to stay. And so my concern is that we are going to swap obesity, the obesity epidemic, for sarcopenia, which is low muscle mass and function, or sarcopenic obesity. We're going to swap one epidemic for another precisely because there's ease of access, but people are not prioritizing muscle health through resistance training and dietary protein. And that, people are going to be worse off after they go on a GLP-1, lose muscle. I mean, it's great because they lose fat, but it can also decrease bone density over time, decrease muscle mass. It can decrease these vital components of aging. So we have to, it almost accelerates aging and accelerates that cycle that we've all been on at some point in our lives or seen people go on where they lose and gain the same 20 to 30 pounds. And I think they're incredible. And I think that they have to be used wisely as a tool.
One study that really just sort of blew my mind, I think it was from Carla Prado's lab. I forget what university up in Canada, but she studied this group of women, and she found that those most likely to die in this large cohort, they weren't the people with the highest BMIs. They had normal BMIs, but they were sarcopenic. It was just like, oh, so these people that we would think like, oh, the heaviest people, they're going to be the ones to die, right? No, it turns out they were normal by BMI standards, but they had such little muscle that it hurt them in the long run. So you're kind of hinting at like that could be the end game here.
That's where I believe that we're going. And I'm going to throw this out there. DEXA doesn't measure muscle mass directly. It extrapolates the totality of lean mass, which is your organs and all these other parts, and then compartmentalizes body fat and bone. We haven't been looking at that. And I'm afraid for our society, our culture, our world, because the obesity epidemic hit and it seemed as if it surprised everybody. All of a sudden, we're dealing with obesity. It just seemed as if, again, in the early 90s, late 80s, it came out of nowhere. Yeah. The same thing is happening right now, underneath our noses. It's happening.
Yeah. And it's almost like you need to, if you're on a GLP-1, great, but you need to almost act as if you're not on one and do the normal healthy things that you would do where you're trying to lose weight without one, which is to say, eat smart, lift some weights, move your body, and that could help offset some of that.
You have to. In fact, it should be required and it should be a requirement. Could you imagine this? Could you imagine your mom who is in her 70s, and for everyone listening, their parents, say in their 70s, who already come from a culture of not eating a ton of protein? We know that when women are in their 60s already, we already know that many of them, it could be anywhere up to 40% of them, 40% are eating below the minimum requirement. So if someone is in their 70s and they're already not attuned to eating higher protein, because that's not really the generation, I mean, we only recently started getting crazy about it, her having a shake is already hard enough. Let's say she goes on a GLP-1, not hungry at all.
Yeah.
Now you have someone in their 70s who is not hungry, who's already not training, but Maybe she has some inflammatory markers, maybe because her body fat is a little bit higher, or maybe that her muscle is unhealthy and she has some inflammation. So while the GLP-1s will potentially lower body fat percentage and for a short period of time, lower inflammation, the data suggests that after 2 years, the majority of people come off of these medications. Now, what are we left with? We've now accelerated aging.
All right, let's land the plane here. Average patient comes to you. You got 30 seconds with them, and you need to tell them. They say, what do I do? Just give me the quick 30-second pitch. What do I do? What do you tell them?
Lift hard, prioritize your protein, and get your mind right.
I love it. Well, Gabrielle, thanks so much for coming on. This was awesome.
You are so welcome. I can't wait to have you on our podcast in Houston.
I got to come out to Houston. We'll go to a Waffle House. We'll eat one of those crazy protein bowls. We'll regret it afterwards, but then we will go train hard and everything will be okay in our lives.
I'm here for it.
All right, thanks for checking out the show, and thanks to Dr. Gabrielle Lyon for coming on to talk about muscle. As a reminder, we are in your feeds twice a week, so please keep an eye out for more. Hit subscribe. That way you'll automatically get those updates and downloads and have them ready for you. And if you want to watch this in video form beyond YouTube, iHeart has a great app. Just as more muscle is good, so are more apps, so check it out. Thanks for listening, and as always, have fun, don't die, and build some more muscle.